Quinton Grimes is the last remaining key part of the Sixers offseason and still remains unsigned. As the days continue to drag on in the offseason, the restricted free agent has yet to agree to a deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. But we have a new report regarding what his mindset exactly is and the type of deal that he is looking to structure to set himself up for the best possible success. I do want to break down exactly what this means for the Philadelphia 76ers, dive into why things have been so radio silent in this overall transaction, and really how the restricted free agent market as a whole is truly to blame. But let's dive right into it and talk some Quentin Grimes. So I want to start off with this report from Jake Fisher here, and he reports here: Quentin Grimes, quote, seems more likely to re-sign with the Sixers on a short-term contract, as any resolution would come next month, Jake Fisher said on Bleacher Report. And to get the exact quote, he said, quote, I do not think we're getting any resolution this week or in July for Quentin Grimes. The Sixers 100% want to bring back Grimes. They want him at a very strong number. My latest understanding is that Grimes will also, in a similar capacity to Jonathan Kuminga and Cam Thomas, he seems more likely to be signing a short-term agreement with Philadelphia. Now, this is a bit of a different situation than I honestly expected to play out. And to lay out a bit of the restricted free agent market, we do know that we had officially got the qualifying offer tendered by the Sixers. This coming back on June 28th, as reported by Kelly Iko here, who tweets out that the 76ers have officially tendered an $8.7 million qualifying offer to guard Quentin Grimes. Now, what this means exactly here is that the Sixers are going to bring back Quentin Grimes. They're just kind of sorting through the deal. And the way the restricted free agent market works, which is at a complete standstill across the league, the Grimes is not the only player being implicated by this, and I do want to circle back to that, but it is up to other teams to sort of drive up the price point, that the organization that has the player under that qualifying offer has the opportunity to match any deal. So this qualifying offer in specific here, Grimes also has a bit of control. One theory that I've seen gain a little bit of traction is the possibility of Grimes opting into this $8.7 million deal, him playing out the length of the season, and then commanding a new contract next offseason. And under those circumstances, he'd be a completely unrestricted free agent, free to sign with whichever team that he pleases. That is not the exact case that we are working in, and I do think that this is more of a league-wide issue. Now, to keep it about Quentin Grimes specifically here, it is interesting to me, the short-term concept. And I do believe that probably what is in his head is he's looking over his shoulders at that Sixers backcourt with Tyrese Maxey, with Jared McCain, and most specifically with VJ Edgecombe, who shares a lot of similarities for what Grimes brings to the table, and obviously much more invested by the Sixers organization as they selected him with the third overall pick, compared to a guy like Grimes, who was traded for at the deadline in exchange for Caleb Martin, who had a cup of coffee here in Philadelphia. Now, when looking at Grimes' production overall, the stats do pop to you. 26.8 minutes per game last year. Across that stretch of time, he averaged 14.6 points, 4.3 rebounds, and 3.0 assists per game. Shot 46.7% from the field, 38.5% from beyond the three-point arc there. And I won't lie, I had to kind of jog my memory a bit that we have been out of basketball season to an extent. Went back and watched a little bit of Quentin Grimes tape, and it is even better than I remembered, to be honest. I understand it did not translate to winning. I understand that he had free reign to do whatever he wanted in that offense, but boy, did he make the most of his opportunity and certainly drove up his price point to a massive extent. Now, I brought up the restricted free agent sort of concept here and why this is at such a standstill. We talked a lot coming into this offseason about the lack of just straight up cap space that is available across the league, that it is very tight pockets, largely driven by the CBA. There continues to be these type of reports circling out here, and I guess reports is probably the wrong word, more of speculation here. As Jay Cooper tweets out here, I'm not reporting this, but it feels like it's coming. Watch closely. Jonathan Kuminga, Quentin Grimes, Cam Thomas, and Josh Giddey all feel like candidates to accept the qualifying offer and hit unrestricted free agency in 2026. No long-term deals, no real offers, just silence. These guys are betting on themselves and taking back control. This could be the first wave of young players pushing back against a system that boxes in mid-tier talent with team-friendly extensions and subtle league-wide collusion. If they follow through, this might change how we look at the restricted free agency moving forward. Not official, not confirmed, but it's coming. Now, he comes on a bit stronger in this report than I think he probably should, but I get where he's coming from here. It is not in the player's best interest, sort of how these are structured. The restricted free agency as a whole is not the type of control that a player really wants to dictate their future. Now, for Quentin Grimes specifically here, the cautionary tale that I would share is be a bit cautious about this from both directions. Now, from the short-term direction, the reason I'd be cautious is who knows what these minutes or what his role will look like in a Sixers or in a Sixers jersey next year. Obviously the situation has changed quite drastically from last year, and again, VJ Edgecombe should be the number one guy that he is looking over his shoulder at from a role perspective. Now, the reason that I say that he should be careful from a short-term perspective is if theoretically he was to go down this road, to take this game plan, to bet on himself and say 1 year, I'm going to ball out and then earn my contract then. If you don't have a guaranteed role that you're walking into, that is not the safest plan. And by the way, it is worth mentioning that Quinton Grimes has been around the league plenty to this point. And to pull up his full NBA stats here, that he obviously started his career with the New York Knicks, spent a season and a half there. And I will note and interject a little bit here. Not anything that I would be as concrete, like critical of Quentin Grimes, but I've heard quite a few whispers about him not getting along in the locker room, and that really being the driving reason for what brought him out of New York. But he spent the 2.5 seasons there, was traded to the Detroit Pistons there, did not play pretty much at all for the Pistons, just 6 total games in that uniform. Then he signed with was traded to the Dallas Mavericks, and then of course flipped to the Sixers at the trade deadline. I understand that in all these situations, if you dive through them individually, you can kind of excuse it, that there are reasons and primarily financially based when diving into why the deal was made. But there is still the kind of a raise my eyebrow a little bit about why have you been on 4 teams at age 25 and have barely been in the NBA to an extent, especially when you just look at the play on the floor, it looks pretty impressive for Quentin Grimes. And this is not just unique to Philadelphia. That there were flashes in Dallas at the beginning of the season. There absolutely were flashes up in New York where he started his career, where I honestly thought he was carving out a lane as like the shooting guard of the future for the Knicks, that he did tease this. And for Grimes specifically, this goes back deeper than just his professional career. This was a guy who started his college career at Kansas, then transferred to Houston and spent his final 2 years there. Now, in fairness to him in this situation, he got opportunity at both spots, and he was a cleaner fit for Houston, that I think this was a spot where he ended up where he belonged in that context there. But there is a lot of, this guy has moved around a lot. This guy is kind of all around the place, and it does make you wonder a bit. Now, the concern from a long-term perspective, this falls a bit back on the Sixers, that obviously Quentin Grimes is going to want to earn as much money as possible. And I think if I was his agent right now, I would be looking to lock myself up to a long-term deal as much as possible. If I can get a 4-year contract, if I can get a 5-year contract at $15-18 million, I am happy with that. Now, Quentin Grimes in particular does not seem to be the case. That we heard the reports of him pushing for $25 million at the start of the season. I thought that was insane at the time. Now that the dust has settled from free agency, it feels like an even greater length of insanity to me, that when you look around at what these other guys are making and him in comparison to those, I just don't think he quite fits into that bracket of NBA players here. And again, like, we're speaking from the Sixers angle, who knows what his role looks like? And you don't want to pay a guy a significant amount of money and tie up your cap to that percentage if you're not sure. What happens if you pay this guy $20 million and VJ Edgecombe is just straight up better than him from day one? That's a mistake that the Sixers don't really want to walk down that path either. And that is, again, what makes this restricted free agent market so difficult. That when there's no one bidding against the Sixers, the team is in the power here. That you can kind of let that number continue to drip down and swoop as low as you can let it and capitalize with that. Now, for Grimes specifically, that's obviously not the game plan, that he doesn't want that number as low as the Sixers can get it. He's going to keep fighting for it, and he's going to continue. His camp will continue to scour the NBA to try and find takers, teams with interest in handing him some sort of significant and competitive deal that does drive off that market. And by the way, that isn't even done with the most genuine intentions here. This is not something that I think Quentin Grimes is trying to find a new team. I think these are directly done with the intention of driving up the price point from the Sixers' perspective. This all circles back to bring to the message that Quentin Grimes is going to be a member of the Sixers next year. It is just sorting through what those dollar figures are, what that length of contract is, and it is a bit surprising to me to see him opt more towards the short-term direction. I don't have a problem with that from the Sixers. That isn't something that would make me blink. If anything, I think this is sort of a situation where he's probably not making the exact right call here, that I think it would be in his best interest to get locked up for the longest extent of time possible. But this also could be, as I mentioned, with all the movement around the league, maybe he's sick of that as well, that he doesn't want to be a guy that his way out of an organization is via trade. He wants to control his destiny from here. So ultimately, still a lot going on behind the scenes in the Quentin Grimes negotiations. It does feel like this is going to continue to drag out for quite some time, that Jake Fisher himself in the initial report saying that he does not believe this will get done in July. Obviously, July coming to a close in the pretty near future here. And I do think, to refer back to this initial restricted free agent tweet, that each of these players is in a slightly different spot based on context. Now, Jonathan Kuminga, there obviously, it is incredibly evident to everyone that has watched his experience with the Golden State Warriors that he does not see eye to eye with that system. Now, the problem with that, I think, true serum, if you were to give it to the Warriors organization, is they want out of the Jonathan Kuminga business as well. But you can't exactly do that without maximizing your potential return. From an organizational standpoint, they're going to want to trade him to get something back for a player that they've invested pretty heavily in. For Kuminga, this feels like the closest source of breakup out of these available names. Grimes, we've talked plenty about. Cam Thomas is an interesting one, as the numbers do really pop when you dive into them, but how much of that is just empty calorie scoring? And he had so much opportunity to do that last year in Brooklyn. There's been kind of a Zach Lowe debate here with Cam Thomas on Twitter, that he basically has come to that, saying that the NBA as a whole sort of believes Cam Thomas is an empty calorie scorer, and Cam fighting right back against this. I think Cam Thomas is talented. I think there's a place for him in the NBA. I also don't think he's quite the $25 million per game or per year type of player that he believes he is. And then Josh Giddey, another unique circumstance here, is that is a player who certainly flashed in the second half of the season. He had his best stretch of basketball since he's come into the NBA while playing for the Chicago Bulls. But how much do you really want to get into the Josh Giddey business? How much is that a guy that you believe could be a foundational core? I honestly thought, and I think I'm probably correct after how this season went down, that he was a flaw on that Thunder team. It's not coincidental that they go on to win a championship, to have their greatest postseason success following him leaving the organization. And that is unfair to fully throw on the shoulders of Giddey, but we saw the way that his minutes were reduced on that there are flaws that do not translate in a playoff setting for Giddey. So when having all these, checks and balances, weighing the pros and cons, what does that number look like that works from both sides? These are all tough spots here, and these are all going to be very interesting to see how they play out. If I had to bet right now, I would guess Kuminga, they find some way to sign and trade him. I do think the other three will return to the teams that they are currently on, and I do think Grimes is probably the most locked into these. Maybe Cam Thomas, you can make the case for certain, will be back in Brooklyn, because I do think that will be the outcome of it, but there's been way more bad blood between Cam Thomas and the Nets organization in this negotiations over a number here. So for the time being, we don't have anything set in stone for Grimes, and don't have any really idea for what the timeline will be. But we should rest easy, and even though the pen has not hit paper yet, Quentin Grimes is going to be a member of the Sixers organization next year. They just got to sort through it. So let me know what you guys think about all that. I know I threw a lot out there today. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are in the comments. What's your predicted salary figure for Quentin Grimes? We'd love to hear that from you guys below. I think I'm locking my prediction at $18 million per year for Grimes. I can see it being a little higher. I can see it being a little lower, but I'm going to rock with that for the prediction today. Let me know what you guys think below. If you have not already, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video here. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.